Not a lot of people actually know that this exists, but in the mid-2000s, there were actual plans for a Grand Theft Auto Zombies game. At the time of its early prototyping, this project was tentatively known as ZTA, likely standing for Zombie Theft Auto, though that definitely wasn't going to be the final release title, and instead of Rockstar Games developing this game, it would have been made by a different studio known as Smackdown Productions, located in France. This studio was founded by Laurent Benadiba, who's most famously known for being the technical director for LA Noire, another Rockstar title. However, this game would have still been done in collaboration directly with Rockstar Games. So it wasn't like Rockstar or Take-Two Interactive were completely out of the loop on this game's early prototyping. Now, while info about this game is still pretty limited, we do know a couple of things: that this game would have been developed for the PlayStation Portable and was likely in development after the releases of Liberty City Stories, Vice City Stories, and Chinatown Wars, probably putting this somewhere in the later 2000s. According to Unseen64, ultimately negotiations ended up breaking down because Smackdown Productions and Rockstar were unable to agree on a suitable budget. While to this day no build of the game has been released, it does appear that there was some sort of prototype that was working and in development, as a couple of screenshots do exist showcasing different vehicles to present a feel for what the game would look like. It very much looks like a standard Grand Theft Auto game, and maybe not too much on the zombie side was actually developed just yet. However, there is an image of this forklift that's really cool, and there is a scantily clad zombie woman that you can see in one screenshot as well. The zombie idea for Grand Theft Auto, though, definitely didn't end there. As many of us know, after the release of Red Dead Redemption back in 2010, later on there would be an expansion known as Undead Nightmare, which took the Red Dead Redemption world and added essentially a full zombie game experience to it. And it looks like that idea would have been brought back potentially for Grand Theft Auto 5 as a story DLC that never actually released. This story actually dropped back in 2019 from Eurogamer, and according to data leakers, there was information found in the DLC update Diamond Casino and Resort for GTA Online that actually revealed a ton of information about the canceled story expansion that would have come to GTA 5. Now, way back when GTA 5 initially released, Rockstar did insinuate that there would be more story DLC down the road, though in 2017, Rockstar changed their statement confirming there was no story DLC coming to GTA 5. The information revealed, though, in the Diamond Casino and Resort data mine suggests that at some point Rockstar was planning to do a single-player DLC by adding an entire new map expansion, and also to take the current existing map of Los Santos and redesign many parts of it to fit into a zombie apocalypse theme. While the existing Los Santos would be completely redesigned to fit into this apocalypse theme and have a full story similar to what Undead Nightmare did with Red Dead, there would be some new locations as well, and one of those locations would have been the casino that was used in the GTA Online update. Though it's very likely that the casino would have had a very different use back then. But here's the thing, this cut episode involving the zombie apocalypse goes way deeper into what was actually planned for this DLC project. It is speculated that you would either get to play as Michael DeSanta or Franklin Clinton from the main GTA 5 story as the protagonist, as there would be plans to use Trevor in a different sort of project, though it seems like most clues are pointing to Franklin being the playable character for this zombie DLC. And apparently this DLC was far enough along in development where there were textures and designs made for things like a boarded up version of a gas station, infected warning graffiti and trailer signs in different places, and also graffiti designs depicting zombies and people wearing gas masks on billboards found in the Grand Sonora Desert area. Now, things get really interesting here because it appears that the reasoning there would be just one main character featured in this episode was that the DLC would have released as 3 separate episodic parts that would have had each character from the main GTA 5 story involved in some sort of expanded or alternate timeline story. So if Franklin, for instance, was supposed to be the zombie character, this next DLC likely would have fallen to Michael, though from what we can tell, it could have been Michael and Franklin switched for either of these episodes. There's text strings suggesting there was a plan for an alien invasion episode as well, and while much less is known about this project than the zombie project, for example, it's suggested that this alien-themed storyline would have followed a character unraveling and encountering aliens to some extent. This might have been one of the later projects worked on, as it doesn't seem to have as much detail that would later make its way way into the big data mine. But the third story in the DLC pack would have been the quote-unquote Agent Trevor episode, where this content actually would end up getting used in GTA 5, just not as the story that people had thought it originally would have been in this 3-part DLC story pack that got cancelled. Out of the entire data mine of the cut content, the Agent Trevor episode was clearly the furthest one along in development. In GTA Online's 1.14 patch script, you can actually find mission triggers, mission lists with code names and coordinates and starting locations, and just a ton of tags referring to aspects of what this DLC_Agent Trevor would have been. There were some iconic points like Trevor Train, Trevor Finale, CIA lines. It goes down to Russian Jet and Russian Finale. There's a ton of different tags in the scripts here, and nowadays other parts were mostly incorporated into GTA Online content, with a lot of these story missions being reworked into the big Doomsday Heist update back in 2017. But some of these codenames and files were discovered all the way back in 2014, 3 years before the Doomsday Heist would release, probably back when this was still story mode DLC for single player and not the online story that it would turn into. Now, besides the 3-part story that would have featured likely Franklin, Michael, and Trevor, there was one more thing discovered later on in a game update for 1.13 and 1.14 alongside that Agent Trevor storyline, and that was also more talks about the Be Lucky Los Santos casino. There also were some unused audio files located from Lester. It appears though that the storyline for this project that was discovered in the files back then was later adapted into the Diamond Casino Heist update, which should be said at the very least, since 2 sections that were cut content that were supposed to be in that story DLC, which would have probably been about 20 to 30 hours, basing it off of what early interviews suggested for a story DLC, that just maybe there's a chance that things like the Alien Invasion episode and the zombie episode could potentially still come out in the future, as so much of this story DLC was reworked into GTA Online in one way or another, as GTA Online obviously became the focus for Rockstar for like a decade. But who knows? Nonetheless, it doesn't look like we'll ever see the original plans for the single player expansion that never came to be, but it still would be cool to see some of these things expanded upon, especially because already in the Grand Theft Auto 5 games themselves, there were some mysterious hints and lore scattered about, especially like the one on top of Mount Chiliad, making references to aliens and a jetpack, which was for the Agent episode. Fans have speculated over what these could have meant for years, thinking that it was something coming to the story or something that hasn't come yet. There's still hope for the future. This wouldn't be the first time that cut GTA content would be used in GTA Online. There were files originally found in GTA 5 for a cut heist known as the Sharmuda job, and way later on aspects of that cut content would make their way into GTA Online in the Cayo Perico heist, if I pronounced that correctly. What's funny is nowadays Grand Theft Auto Online is like one of the biggest projects that Rockstar has, but for a long time that wasn't always the case. However, the idea for an online Grand Theft Auto game came way before Grand Theft Auto 4's multiplayer or Grand Theft Auto Online with GTA 5 released. All the way back in the day, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, Grand Theft Auto Online Crime World was apparently in development, which would have brought the older style of top-down Grand Theft Auto games into an online setting for PC players, which would have allowed multiple players to play at the same time. Now, not too much is known about this, though there was an article posted in PC Zone back in December of 1999, which talks about what GTA Online Crime World would look like, but the article also talks about how Rockstar will be taking Grand Theft Auto likely to the 3D format sometime in the future, which obviously they would when Grand Theft Auto 3 would release. It seems like after Grand Theft Auto 3 was announced though, nothing was ever brought up again about Grand Theft Auto Online Crime World, and of course, online multiplayer wouldn't be added to Grand Theft Auto until Grand Theft Auto 4. It is possible that Grand Theft Auto Online Crime World did see an early cancellation, as with the big and ambitious development of Grand Theft Auto 3, there were plans early on to have an online functionality for this game as well. Hidden in the game files are leftover text strings for things involving multiplayer, like text for searching for games, connecting to the internet, internet, numbers of players. There's even some game types listed in there like Team Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, something called Stash the Cash, Rat Race, and Domination. There even were unused multiplayer menu backgrounds that never were added into the game. A lot of this information nowadays is archived on the cutting room floor, which also states that according to Rockstar, this multiplayer mode for Grand Theft Auto 3's online was cut in favor of putting more resources for Grand Theft Auto Vice City, which would be the next Grand Theft Auto game released relatively shortly after GTA 3. Still, it is interesting to see how online was born off of an idea from Grand Theft Auto that was based around this original top-down perspective that the first two GTA games had. There was actually some more interesting projects that were from the top-down perspective that also never made their way out to release. There was a Grand Theft Auto port planned for the Sega Saturn that never got to see a release. Lead programmer Keith Hamilton actually talked a little bit about the Sega Saturn version of Grand Theft Auto, which would have been just a port of the PC version, though it would have possibly used a different engine, likely the engine from a different Sega Saturn game known as Clockwork Knight, which did have some 3D functionality and enhanced graphics, which may have meant that in this version of Grand Theft Auto, there could have been some higher level of detail and quality to the design of the game. Not too much else is known about what happened to this project. We do know that a version of Grand Theft Auto was ported for the original PlayStation, and it is very well likely that Rockstar, after seeing how the Sega Saturn wasn't performing very well in North America, just chose to scrap the project altogether. Still, all these years later, there were various screenshots showcasing Grand Theft Auto Online for the Sega Saturn, which are some of the images that you saw while we were talking about this, and still, it's just interesting that this never came to fruition. Now, after the success of the PlayStation port of Grand Theft Auto, there were some plans to bring Grand Theft Auto, this time to the Nintendo 64, which would have been a direct port, though it would have had some enhancements to the graphical capabilities. It even had some coverage in gaming press, though once again, this project would never come to fruition and never saw a release. Next, when it comes to Grand Theft Auto on the Game Boy Advance, there was a release of Grand Theft Auto, which is very interesting to look at the gameplay of that now. However, it seems like there were plans also to coincide with the release of Grand Theft Auto 3 to have another Grand Theft Auto game released on the Game Boy Advance to ride off the hype of GTA 3 called Grand Theft Auto 3, which of course though would have been for the Game Boy Advance and wouldn't have been 3D like what the main game was. Another instance of a game prototype that not too much is known about other than the fact that it would have been developed by Crawfish Interactive and then probably published by Destination Software Inc., but of course would have worked alongside Rockstar for the release of this title. Unfortunately, this never actually came to fruition and never released, and the next handheld GTA game with the top-down perspective would end up being Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars, which would release on the DS later on. One of the biggest and most mysterious titles, though, that Rockstar had announced that we never heard anything from again, not even an official cancellation, was a title known as Agent, which would have used the Rage engine, which is the same engine that current Grand Theft Auto games are built in. Not too much is actually known about this game. What we do know is that it was going to be developed by Rockstar North and was originally planned to be a PlayStation 3 exclusive game. It was announced in 2009 and was called a future AAA title that would have been published by Take-Two Interactive, just like the Grand Theft Auto games. Now, development of this game actually can be tracked likely all the way back to 2007 when there were talks about Rockstar working on developing a brand new franchise, but it wasn't until 2009 that we got a little bit of information, and all we do is that this game, quote-unquote called Agent, would have been set during the Cold War and would have players involved to some extent in the world of counterintelligence, espionage, and political assassinations. It might have been a little more serious in tone than a lot of the Grand Theft Auto titles, but still a very unique perspective that might have been placed in the mid to late 1970s for a specific time period. After the initial announcement, not much was ever brought up about the game again, though 2 years later in 2011, Take-Two confirmed that the game was still in the development phases. However, anytime the game was brought up in future years, the statement that would be used across the board from Rockstar representatives was, "We have nothing to talk about," or "Nothing's been announced about that title yet." When it was announced that the PlayStation 4 was coming on the horizon, a lot of fans suspected that Agent might have been moved to be an exclusive PS4 title, though once again, there was never an announcement of the game. Grand Theft Auto 5 would be announced and would release, and even following the release of Grand Theft Auto 5, there still was never anything brought up about this Agent game ever again. Later on, a developer from Rockstar Games would post some screenshots of areas that they designed for the Agent game on their ArtStation account and a logo for the game, but outside of that, that's all we ever saw from Agent, and to this day, we still don't know what happened to it. Some of you may remember that back during the PS2 days, Rockstar released a game known as The Warriors, which was a beat-em-up 3D game based on the movie of the same title. After the release of that game, it seemed like Rockstar Toronto was going to work on a follow-up game, but this time would be a spiritual successor, not actually based on any specific movie, and Rockstar would create their own universe and IP, but based on a lot of the features, functionality, and gameplay from the Warriors game. This project, known as We Are the Mods, but the fan community refers to it still as The Warriors 2, never saw the light of day, but what we do know is that it was in development in 2006 as a PS2 project, but eventually Rockstar decided to move it to the Xbox 360. It would have featured mods and rockers as two conflicting British youth subcultures in the early to mid 1960s and early 1970s. But what's interesting about this is the game was originally never supposed to be announced to begin with. It only was actually unveiled because of leaked assets in 2011 that revealed some projects that Rockstar had been working on internally, one of them being what people thought was a Warriors sequel. It seems like ultimately though this project ended up having to be canceled because Rockstar Toronto ended up being reassigned to help with development on Manhunt 2, which was a bigger priority at the time for Rockstar, so this game ended up getting left behind and just a few assets have been preserved since then. Way back in the late 90s and early 2000s, Spec Ops was a game that Take-Two Interactive had published and saw some moderate success to, and after the release of Spec Ops Covert Assault and Spec Ops Airborne Commando, it seemed like Take-Two Interactive tasked Rockstar Games at developing a Spec Ops game to revitalize the series in a new direction. Other than just a press release announcing that Rockstar was working on a ton of different games and Spec Ops was one of the games in the long list, not too much else was really discussed about Rockstar's Spec Ops game. A singer known as Josh Homme did confirm that he was writing the soundtrack for the game and talked a little bit about the music and said that working with Rockstar on a game was a dream come true. And eventually some concept art would be released of the game, but outside of that, nothing ever came to fruition. It seemed like Rockstar pivoted as this team that was working on this project ended up beginning development on the game Bully instead. Now the Bully series in itself is really interesting when it comes to Rockstar's canceled games, because after the release of Bully, there was a ton of speculation from the fans for a very long time that Bully 2 had been in secret development, and it wasn't until only a few years ago where we finally got confirmation at the very least that at one point Rockstar did have plans for a Bully 2. Now these rumors started all the way back to just after the release of the first Bully, when the music scorer Sean Lee claimed that he was working on a soundtrack for Bully 2, though Rockstar never officially confirmed that there was a sequel in development. These rumors would continue to circle around every Rockstar game related project for the following years. Like in 2011, Dan Houser, who was talking about Max Payne 3, also talked about keeping the options open for a Bully sequel, but also talked about how the timing wasn't right after the release of Bully. Later on, Dan Houser would even say he had numerous ideas for another Bully game. Back in 2019, a YouTuber known as Swegta did a discussion talking about possibilities of a Bully 2 game that was in development around the time that Red Dead Redemption was in development, but never got off the ground, and more manpower needed to be resourced to Red Dead Redemption, so the prototype of whatever Bully 2 would have been kind of fell apart. And this ended up getting partially confirmed by another news outlet known as Video Game Chronicles, which added that a short section of Bully 2 was playable at some point and speculated the story would have taken place in the summertime, possibly in between school years. But nonetheless, Bully 2 ended up fizzling out and never saw its release. It's still of course possible Bully could see a a return one day. Back in 2013, Rockstar renewed the trademark for Bully, and then they renewed it again in 2021, but outside of the original game being available on newer consoles, it doesn't look like too much is planned for the future, so we'll just have to wait and find out. Then there was the canceled Rockstar game known as Oni 2. Originally, Rockstar published Oni, developed by Bungie back in the early days of Bungie before they were fully committed to Halo, and after the release of the first Oni title, it seemed like the rights rolled back to Rockstar Games, and they assigned a new studio, Angel Studios, who they had recently acquired, to begin work on a follow-up game in the Oni franchise, which potentially would have used that same Rage engine that Grand Theft Auto is built off of, especially because Angel Studios were the first team to start establishing that engine. Once again, another canceled title where not too much is known about it, but it does seem like Oni 2 had two working titles, one called Death and Taxes, and the other game internally used known as Oni 2 Rebirth, which likely would have been the realer title. I don't know. Oni 2 Death and Taxes does have a main menu screen, so maybe that one was the real title. Now, to an extent, it seems like Oni 2 actually was in further development than some of the other titles we've talked about in this video, but also it seems like so much of the process of getting this game off the ground was spent in just moving people around and projects around to get this game started. According to some sources, the movement and combat systems were considerably more complex than what the original Oni game would have had, and would have had grappling and parrying, something that wasn't in the original game. There'd also be some movement enhancements like ledge grabbing and AI that could disarm the player, and it seemed like a lot of the movement was being refined for the future release of the game. A lot of concept art for the game was developed, there were even some prototype designs made, and if you're wondering where this footage comes from, in 2016, a development build of the game was leaked and archived on the YouTube preservation channel PTOP Online. As far as story is concerned, it didn't look like too much development or writing had even begun yet, and there was just a lot of placeholders as the core base version of the game was just being constructed. But this game would end up not ever seeing a release. Maybe Oni wasn't successful enough financially, or perhaps they needed more hands on deck for Grand Theft Auto 4, and this game would end up being scrapped alongside all the other games we've talked about in this video. And then, last but not least, there apparently was development on two major remasters over at Rockstar that seemingly have been canceled or at least delayed as of now. These are more recent titles, so it's harder to definitively say that they're canceled forever, but after the release of the Grand Theft Auto Remastered trilogy that they did, where they upscaled GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas, there were plans for a Red Dead Redemption remaster and a Grand Theft Auto 4 remaster, which would have been really popular as both of these games were huge and incredibly successful back in their heyday. Now, it seems like the development on these may have been paused, likely due to the backlash that the GTA Remaster trilogy had for what most critics and players point out kind of being a lazier remaster with a lot of visual inconsistencies and performance issues. And it's also been suggested that Rockstar is going full on in on development on Grand Theft Auto 6 right now, and perhaps those other projects needed to have the brakes paused a little bit. However, newer leaks and rumors from just a couple of months ago suggest that Red Dead Redemption and GTA 4 Remastered are now back on the table. So perhaps there was a pause to rework some of the systems in place for remastering these games to avoid having the same problems they had with the previous trilogy re-release. So we don't fully know if these projects are fully canceled just yet, or they're still in some level of active development. Really, time will tell, but I wouldn't be too surprised if we saw Red Dead Redemption Remastered and GTA 4 Remastered released sometime in the future. Now, we'd like to turn this around to you guys though. If you're watching this far in the video, which Rockstar game would you have liked to see actually release more so than any other game on this list? Let us know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Make sure you subscribe with notifications on for more videos like this, where we do deep dives into canceled series and look backs into other types of interesting video game things from the mid 2000s. We'd also like to give a huge shout out to our patrons for supporting our channel. Hey, if you have a few bucks burning a hole in your pocket, you could support our channel. Join our Patreon, link in the description down below. You get your name right here in the credits. Isn't that cool? If you pledge a little more, you get your name even in gold. So there's that incentive also. All right, that's it for today though. We'll see you guys all next time with a brand new video.